to welcome you all to this policy exchange fringe meeting on designing a truly digital government. As Rowan Silver, the former number 10 policy advisor, makes clear, sorry, a bit more audible, makes clear in the forward to Policy Exchange's recently published report, Smaller, Better, Faster, Stronger, Remaking Government for the Digital Age, the current administration has made huge strides in making public services accessible online and also releasing data to help hold the government to account. But there's still a long way to go. Stephen Kelly, the government's own chief operating officer, recently disclosed that it takes him 7 minutes to boot up his PC when he comes into his Whitehall office in the morning. And we're still not really seeing the big sort of leaps forward in public sector productivity that we're going to need, coping with an ageing population in an era of constrained budgets. So here to debate the way ahead, we have a truly distinguished panel. On my right is Frances Maude, Minister for the Cabinet Office, who has led the digital agenda across government since the coalition came to power in 2010. Next to him is Jerry McQuaid, who is the Chief Marketing Officer Non-Consumer Mobile for the company EE, which was formed out of the merger of Orange and T-Mobile, and he'll give us the industry perspective. On my left is Dr. Mark Thompson, Senior Lecturer in Information Systems at Cambridge Judge Business School, who will talk about how government can think smarter about technology markets and the benefits they can bring. And next to him, playing for the home team, is Chris Yu, who co-authored the excellent Policy Exchange report that I mentioned earlier. So I'm going to invite them each to speak for round about 6 or 7 minutes, and then I'll throw it open to your questions. So, Minister, I'd like to start with you.
Well, Sarah, thank you very much, and I'll just say a little bit about what we're up to, but recognising absolutely that the progress that we've made on digital in the last 3 years is only a beginning, and there's a huge government starts way behind where equivalent organisations in the private sector would be. But actually, because of starting where we are, there's an opportunity for us to do things to move very quickly. Governments have claimed, or continuously tended to claim to be more digital than they are. The Blair government made a commitment that services would be put online, and in many cases, bits of government reported they'd done this. What it meant they'd done was that you could download a form online, print it off, fill it in by hand, and send it in by post. This is not what we mean. Let me just be absolutely clear about this. And there are some very good digital applications produced by government. I mean, the one everyone goes on about is the DVLA application for renewing your car tax online. Pretty good. Only half of car owners use it, although 3/4 of car owners renew their car insurance online. So it isn't that they're excluded from doing it, just that they don't. And we need to find ways of changing that. When we set up the Government Digital Service 2.5 years ago, we set ourselves 2 missions really. One was first thing to do was to transform in the way in which we publish online. We discovered that there were more government websites than you could shake a stick at. The number is falling, not quite as fast as we're closing them down, only because we keep finding more of them, often in conflict with each other. We discovered there was one that promoted healthy eating and another that promoted eating chips. Slightly bothersome. We've closed down loads of them to create a single platform for government publishing and services, gov.uk. This, we were very proud, and it's a huge credit to the brilliant civil servants who led its creation. It won the Design Council's overall design award for the year, beating such trifling constructions as the Shard, the Thomas Heatherwick Olympic cauldron into 2nd and 3rd place. It's not perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better than what it replaces, and we're doing it for 30% of the cost of what it replaces. So cheaper, better, more unified, and open source. And it was a good signal of its success that I think the New Zealand government has recently decided to import the code wholesale and to use it for their own digital offering, which is good. So the next stage is moving transactions online, and we're going through a process of taking 25 exemplar transactions. There are 650 different government types of transactions which are capable of being delivered online. We're taking the first 25, which actually will cover quite a lot of the bulk, because some of these are very, very high volume. Some of them are tiny in terms of volume. I mean, there's one transaction which is about getting consent for burials at sea. This is a relatively limited market. So that will probably load up the list for digitalising. As we do this, so going down the path of being digital by default, if it can be delivered online, it should be delivered online and only online. We need better ways for people to assure their identity. Like the United States, we do not have, nor will we have, a national identity card and national identity database. So we need to find good ways which can protect people's privacy and allay the concerns of the privacy lobbies, but good ways for them to assure their identity. And this is being developed in quite a groundbreaking way, with creating a market of identity providers. So the citizen can choose their own identity provider, have control of their own data. The government does not bring together different data sets for the purposes of assuring the citizen's identity. That is done outside government, but it will have great benefit. The United States is going down a similar path, and I'm happy to say that we're ahead of them. So there's a lot going on this front. Quickly, just to touch on data. Government data is pretty bad in terms of quality. Typically, governments are inconsistent in the way they gather and publish data, inconsistent across government, inconsistent across the years. So it's typically very difficult to compare apples in one part of government with apples in another, or apples this year with apples last year, because the series tend to change. Management information is very, very poor. The non-executives we brought in from business to strengthen the governance of departments and help us to drive efficiency have been shocked by how poor management information is. We are making progress, but much too slowly. Frankly, the way we use data in policy formation leaves much to be desired. There's merit in us moving to a position where, while continuing properly to protect the space within which officials advise ministers on policy and ministers debate policy, which has to be done in private, so that there can be very candid advice and very frank discussion. But there's a case for moving to a default setting where the data, the evidence on which policy decisions are based, is made public. This would induce a greater rigor. It would induce a greater degree of concern for the quality of data. We are a world leader in open data. We are acknowledged to be the world leader, which is reflected in our lead chair role in the Open Government Partnership, which has been a very fast-growing and unique international organisation partnership, both between governments promoting open government and civil society organisations. But we want to go further. This is a path which will have no ending. There is no final destination in terms of open data. And it serves open data. The open data agenda serves three objectives. One is about accountability. It's simply letting people know what we spend their money on, how government works, all of enabling and informing choice for the citizen and control for the citizen over public services. And the public today are more demanding of having choice and being able to exercise it in an informed way. And the third area is about promoting growth, economic growth through the entrepreneurs who take data, for whom data is the new raw material, which is capable of being developed to create huge new applications and products, but also social growth, where the social capital can be created by the use, the intelligent and creative use of data in and around communities. So data and digital is the way of the future. And some of this is quite difficult to do. You shouldn't underestimate, particularly transparency, how much this takes both politicians and officials out of their comfort zone. Because the default setting for all governments is to be closed. To move to a reverse position where the default setting is to be open is a very uncomfortable, difficult thing to do. There's nothing fluffy about this. This is hard-edged, rigorous stuff, which induces a much harder-edged, rigorous approach to the way in which we conduct ourselves in government. So we're in the early stages of this. I'm happy that we seem to be a world leader in this, but there's much more for us to do. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Francis. Jerry, speak to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this is a fascinating subject for me. I'm really pleased to be here because, to be honest, what we're talking about here is something I see as a challenge in our own business. As the Minister says, governments can sometimes overstate their digital credentials. Businesses do the same. I know more than one company that actually has an online sales site where at the back end of it someone prints off what you've ordered and they give it to a call centre and they retype it into their core systems. The challenge is universal. It's a major trend that is very dynamic. As you say, it's not going to stop, and it's something that is a journey we're all on. I think it's fair to say government is behind, but it is a journey that businesses in the UK are on, and in many people's eyes, the UK business sector, whilst their consumers are absolutely at the front edge of digital enablement, UK businesses are probably not there in terms of the European counterparts. One of the things one of my day jobs is looking after our business customers. I have 4 million connections for business customers that I look after, and on a daily and weekly basis I go out and speak to CEOs and CIOs of UK businesses, and they are talking about exactly what's in this report. It's the same challenges that they're facing. They're trying to keep up with the dynamic of what their customers are doing, trying to make sure that their businesses are responding to that. And I think that in the report, Chris and the policy exchange team have done a really good job at expressing obviously the progress that's been made, but more importantly, what the future could look like, and most importantly, what transformation is needed to get there. At EE, as I say, we've got a very similar, much smaller, but a similar challenge to what the government faces. One of the things that we, as a UK network, and over half the UK population, or about half the UK population, use our network on a daily basis. We saw some time ago a very changing dynamic in how our customers were using our network, which meant that we had to change our strategy very dynamically to try and think about what our investment profile would be to respond to what very much a move from people using their phones, and we'll call them phones, for voice and text, to using the device for something very different. Voice and text is about 10-20% of how people use their mobiles these days. It's a very changing dynamic, which had a big impact on our business. So we saw that change early, and I think the impact on us was quite dramatic, and we realised actually we needed to respond to enable digital for the UK economy. I think the challenge that the government has is there's probably 2 or 3 things that the government will face that we didn't face. One is that in trying to respond to the demand side, in the UK there's probably about 10 million people who don't have access to online. And that's a major challenge in terms of delivering a service which is digital only. 1 in 5 of those people are saying actually they're not online because they don't have the digital skills that are required to utilise that technology. And I think the third part of that is probably that the people who have not got those skills are probably the highest users of government services. They're more likely to be pensioners or job seekers or the undereducated. And that's a big challenge that the government have that I think most industry doesn't have. So what's the business role in trying to support that? Well, as an infrastructure company, it's quite important for us that actually we're a national infrastructure company. That's how we look at ourselves. We look at ourselves as delivering a critical infrastructure to the community. We decided to invest, very early we decided to invest hard in delivering super fast broadband to the UK. So we invest over 3 years, probably about £1.5 billion to deliver a super fast broadband capability in 4G. I think it's fairly public. We've been very aggressive in the rollout of that, and by next year, by the end of next year, that will cover probably 98% of the UK population. The challenge, of course, is, what about that last few percent? And I think that to have a digital inclusion policy is really important that we get to everyone. Our view is that mobile, for that last few percent, we need a mobile and a fibre environment. But for those last few percent, it's really important that I think that the most cost effective, the quickest way to get to the last few percent is probably mobile. Because it can deliver a digital inclusion that probably other technologies won't do. I think the other area that we're trying to respond to is this issue of skills. As a company, it's not just about delivering the capability. We recognise that our customers actually have the same issues with these skills. So as part of our social responsibility programme, we've taken it ourselves to work with the Go On charity to develop skills within the UK to enable people to start to have skills to use just very simple services. For us, that means that we've got a target of trying to get to 1 million people. The way we do that is we have over 600 shops, we have multiple call centres throughout communities in the UK. We ask our staff to be digital champions, to go out, have meetings, work with people to show them how to use the internet. It's largely pensioners, and that works very well. We also have what we call techie tea parties in our shops, invite people in, sit around the table, take them through how they can use a tablet, how they can use the internet. It's a really important part, not just for the social use, actually is important for us in terms of how our customers use our services. I think the key here is, I think the government has to respond. There's a real demand from consumers. It's not just about there's a technological drive. The consumers are driving it very hard. I think the report shows where the government's showing good progress. I think the Gov.uk process, I think the work we see in terms of procurement is a really good first steps. However, the challenge is enormous, but the prize is enormous. The change is dramatic. It's going to be technological, it's going to be organisational. Probably the hardest part that all businesses face is it's going to be cultural. But it's not a journey you cannot go on. It's a journey we have to go on. I think the prize is big. It's transformational, and transformational is difficult, but it has to be embraced.
Thanks very much, Joe. Mark, over to you.
I suppose one of the privileges about being an academic is you get to be catty sometimes when you turn up. And on this case, we're actually not really catty because it's undeniable what progress has actually been made since 2007, where we had about a 21-22 billion spend on IT, 80% went to about 12 suppliers. Only one of whom, BT, was a domiciled UK taxpayer, which is quite interesting. And I think over the last 20-25 years, we've all got used to, as Thompson mentioned, sort of some of these ideas and people claiming to be digital. Particularly the word transformation we've heard lots of, haven't we? And in fact, if you go to almost any public sector organisation, you'll probably find 2 or 3 different transformation programs on the go at any one time. Which one are you interested in? And if you actually ask what sort of model people are transforming towards, most people will tell you the answer is leaning old processes, so tightening up your existing vertically integrated siloed processes and outsourcing them to your favourite suppliers. So I think we've all got fed up of transformation within the public sector. There's definitely transformation fatigue. It's a massively overused word, a little bit like cloud, which is, there's the word cloudish for people who make use of cloud inappropriately. Transformation is another one. What's exciting, I think, about what's been done over the last 3 or 4 years, first by Efficiency Informed Group under Francis and then by GDS, is first of all, a bit of intellectual clarity. By talking about open standards, you can actually compare apples with apples. If you can do that, things become price sensitive. So rather than paying everybody for a bespoke suit across government, you actually start to say some things we can treat like commodities, because electricity, for example, is price sensitive. We don't really care who our supplier is. And that in turn starts to change your procurement policy. So by talking about comparing apples with apples, government was able to start overhauling some, frankly, fairly clapped out procurement policies and favouring again the favourite suppliers. Then certainly there have been some great success in the publishing front, and now obviously moving to transactions. So I don't think anybody can take away from that. And I think given the last 20, 25 years of history of wholesale importation of private sector concepts in the public sector, but actually not really doing it properly, if you like. So, for example, the purpose of aggregating demand in government is so that the economic boot is on the government's foot. Unfortunately, in creating a top tier of suppliers, the government has succeeded in doing exactly the opposite, so it's aggregated supply, which is pretty stupid if you think about it. So I think that we have made some fantastic progress. There are, I think this is one of the kind of briefs for this, is ideas for the manifesto. So I'm coming up with 2 or 3 ideas for the manifesto here. So I think there's a lot further, obviously, to go because this is so exciting. I think there's a couple of tactical ones and there are a couple of strategic ones I wanted to raise. On the tactical front, it was interesting sharing GovNet's conference on Wednesday. 350, 400 people from the public sector there. Many of them are very, very worried about PSN codes of connection. So in other words, standardising the way in which people connect to some government networks has become now a question of pass or fail. The problem is if you fail, rather than actually work collaboratively with government, you then get your service switched off, which then creates a severe kind of red flag service delivery error for you. And there are many people who are very worried about that at the moment. I think there are, I was talking to Philip earlier on, and his question is over identity, I suppose. So obviously with universal credit and and identity being rolled out across government, we've got Cabinet Office taking a lot of responsibility for that, so telling people what they can and can't do. However, again, if you have a service failure at local level, where does executive responsibility for that lie? So I think that's quite interesting as Cabinet Office starts to take a more, in many cases, I think rightfully front foot role in driving some of this out. I think some of those issues have yet to be thought through a little bit. So I think we need to do some more thinking about that. I think also, travelling around the place, I think it's evident to most people that there's an enormous communication gap between the good folks and GDS and many people who kind of wider diaspora across the public sector. So for example, at the moment, I think to obtain the next tranche of IT funding, you have to be able to develop something called a digital roadmap. If I ask people to put their hands up in this room at the risk of sounding like a lecturer and saying, what's a digital roadmap? It would surprise me if more than 2 or 3 people got the answer right. It's not an enterprise architecture, it's not a project plan. And again, I think there's a bit of a gap of understanding and frankly some panic among some people who aren't going to get what they need to deliver services unless they get the tick in the box. So I think there's a lot more communication and education that's required. Again, nobody's fault given how far we've come and so quickly, but I think those are important. More strategically and maybe fundamentally more interesting, I think, are the long-term implications of some of what's going on here. So this isn't really just about open data, it's very important. It's not really just about procurement, although that's very important. It's not necessarily about doing things more cheaply. If you actually look at most of the most widely discussed businesses on the planet, and we're talking about the usual kind of characters, Google, Facebook, etc., they tend to be called platform businesses. Now, government isn't a platform, and there are many reasons why government is different from platform. It consumes and provides services, you can't outsource risk to a platform, all the rest of it. However, there isn't nearly enough kind of considered discussion, if you like, about the bits of platform economics that government very visibly needs to take greater account of. There was a fascinating article, I think, following Mr. Thatcher's death, in the kind of aftermath and discussion of that in the FT, funny enough, I think in March, that said actually a big policy challenge for the Conservatives is to be more pro-market and not so pro-business. And I think and unpacking that in a second, I think implicit in digital architecture platforms is a fundamental anti-corporatism. In other words, platforms by comparing apples with apples and commoditizing things and pulling together platforms of demand, enable all sorts of little people to innovate on those platforms with incredible rapidity. If you think about the average life of an application on iOS, okay, the Apple, that's a closed platform, it's a matter of weeks. And there are whole secondary businesses who filter all this massive tsunami of new innovation and investment on a platform. Of course, the great thing about government is government, if it gets its act together, and it will take decades to do it properly, could be the biggest platform of all, because there's massive demand for these things. So I think that we need to think about the role of and the shape of future government in a decorporatized way. And that means pretty much, and I think we're making a start here in terms of transactions, we can go much further. So standard building blocks, common business processes, removing much of the corporate layer in UK public services. That could have an enormous implication for the structure of public service and the public sector, the entire public sector itself, taking, frankly, pen pushers and corporate structures which are highly duplicatory straight out of the system. And I think that also flows to the access argument as well, because yes, we need ideas of zero touch and encouraging people to self-serve digitally, but actually the billions and billions and billions that could be taken out of the public sector could be directed straight towards an increase in face-to-face services if we did it properly. So digital doesn't necessarily mean a state withdrawal from face-to-face services if we got it right. And I think sometimes the argument is incorrectly framed there. So I think there's enormous implications of digital, if you like, for a kind of new mandate for public service reform around platforms. Public service reform hasn't really gone anywhere conclusive as far as I can see. Here is a potential design and architecture for that with some real intellectual clout to it. One or two kind of add-ons to what I've said, and I'll finish. There's a massive opportunity which hasn't been addressed yet because no one's had any time really to do it, and I think I hear rumblings of people beginning to talk about it, and that is local services. So if there was ever an opportunity to roll platforms out to massive destructive impact in terms of the old siloed ways of doing things, it's local services. Local government, we have 300 or so unitaries, tiers, authorities, etc., 400 in fact in total, organisations, many of whom do precisely the same thing. And many of them pay service delivery companies up to £1 million per time just to adjust existing services to cope with new legislation. And at a time when local authorities are asking residents which services they'd like to cut. And frankly, I think that's a bit offensive. So what on earth is DCLG doing about that? Where is the central government leadership in terms of architecting new platforms for local services? The other thing about platforms, of course, is we're seeing a new merging of local services, healthcare, third sector delivery organisations, charities, etc. All of those could use platforms, including citizens, in ways we've never been thought of. We need more strategic vision 3, 5, 7, 10 years hence to work out what that could do to the shape of the public sector landscape. And finally, education, kind of a larger plea for education. Obviously, you would expect as an academic. I think people like Sally Howes and the NAO are doing fantastic work, actually, rather than arriving as the NAO used to do and sweeping up the mess of public sector IT disasters. She's getting out there proactively now and explaining to people what good looks like. And I think there is an enormous lacuna of understanding about what digital really looks like and its implications for the public sector, partly because, let's face it, digital is a big turn-off for a lot of people, and it's not particularly excitingly communicated. I think we could do that. I think Conservatives could place that much more centrally, maybe take digital out of the fringe meetings, such as this one, and put it a little more central.
Thanks very much, Roger. And finally, Chris.
Okay, thank you. Evening. So what I thought I would do is three things. One, just very briefly remind you, as if you need reminding, how much the internet and data and technology have changed our world and how fast that's happened. Spend a bit of time on the two big trends that we think will shape this debate over the next decade, and then give you a handful of ideas from the report about how one might build on the work that's already been done in the Cabinet Office and in government. So just a quick recap on change, right? So this has happened really, really fast. So I'll give you a few examples. Kodak, a few decades ago, invented the digital camera. They then decided not to bet big on that because they wanted not to cannibalize their chemicals and paper business. You know how the story goes. So actually, you don't buy any of the stuff from Kodak anymore. You go to Canon or Nikon or one of these companies. Or actually, that story is out of date because most of us are now carrying a mobile device with an image sensor in it, which is of pretty high quality, good enough to mean a lot of people don't need a camera. And the story winds up with, of course, Instagram being bought by Facebook for $1 billion. And Instagram at the time employed 13 people. 13 people. It's astonishing. If you think about retail, the way sites like Amazon have changed the way that we shop, not just undercutting on price, but doing recommendations and providing a speed of service which is not possible in other domains. And actually, many of these products now, once upon a time, would have been shipped by Amazon to your house, are now coming over the internet straight into your device. And if you think about the way that the internet has changed peer-to-peer relationships, so Airbnb or TripAdvisor or Zipcar, all of these sorts of things which allow you to connect with other individuals, realize value that wasn't realizable previously. And all of this has happened really, really fast. So Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr, Reddit, none of these existed 10 years ago. 20 years ago, Google didn't exist. There were only a few hundred websites in the world. 30 years ago, there was no internet. That's how fast it's happened. Now, if you look forwards, the two things that we think are really interesting, one is the internet and data and technology will be all around us. So already, a very high proportion of the population are online. We know there's a serious issue about the minority who aren't online and need to build up skills and capabilities. We shouldn't overlook that. But if you're thinking out a decade hence, our sense is that actually everybody will find themselves connected and with access to high-performance technology all of the time. And it's because of devices like this. So the traditional description of people sitting in front of a computer screen with a mouse and a keyboard, I think is starting to give way. And if you've read the Eric Schmidt, Jared Cohen book about the future of the internet, one of the things that will have struck you is that that description of the future is almost entirely about the handset and the tablet, very little about the computer, the traditional thing. The other big thing that's happening is this trend towards openness. So we know that the internet is based on open foundations and open standards and so on. That is a lot of the reason for its phenomenal growth. But this, of course, is bleeding into the rest of our lives and conversations about society and policy. So all of the change around open data, open government, open policy making, it's very difficult to see that going backwards. And actually, as citizens, we demand more from government. We demand better access and transparency. We expect our voices to be heard, and that pressure will only mount. So if you think about all of that context and ask, well, what would you do to change government going forwards? So we've got three areas that we majored on. So one was building on digital by default. Where does that conversation go? And I think it's, and we touched on this already, it's about having the bravery to start turning other things off, which is what Martha Lane Fox, when she first did the review of DirectGov, one thing she said was that not only does digital enable you to deliver better service to citizens at lower cost, but you can also start to switch the other channels on. And it doesn't mean switch everything off and go entirely digital, regardless of whether that's appropriate, but actually, as we've been saying, do that where you can to realise some quite substantial efficiency savings, and maybe something that does go back into frontline services or face-to-face where that's important. So when we talk to advisors in Job Centre Plus, they say to us, we still need to eyeball people when they first come into the job centre, because it's an important part of the relationship in doing our job. But a lot of the process that happens after that could be massively streamlined so that we could focus on the things that only human beings can do. And there's huge potential there. And it goes to the points around opening up the way that government works, so not just doing the transactions online, but actually exposing the APIs so that third parties can start to build apps and services around government activities. Where, for example, is the app that would securely integrate my online banking and my tax return. I, for one, find that quite useful. HMRC probably won't build that for me. My bank probably won't build that for me. But if you were to expose enough of the connectors and have them built on open standards, then that sort of innovation becomes possible. Second is about better use of data in government, and we talked about management information and so on. I've been a civil servant in the past. I think it's fair to say that I've seen evidence-based policy making and I've seen policy making. And we have to get better at using the data to drive decisions. If you think about the way modern internet and digital businesses do this, it runs off the data in something close to real time so that you can pivot fast when something isn't working and avoid making big, expensive mistakes. And I think building on the open data discussion, there's going to be more of a role for the high performance analytics that we see in some parts of the private sector, which happens in some areas of government, but harnessing very high-end computing power to discover insights and make predictions that weren't possible previously has the potential to uncover some very large things. And then the last thing I'll say is probably, I think, the most important, which is that despite all of the conversation about technology and my huge enthusiasm for all of the wonderful things that it can do, the truth is that this agenda lives or dies on leadership. So it takes great leaders who understand the potential of this area. And this administration has been very fortunate, I think, in the leadership that Francis, you've shown, and others in GDS have shown around this. But we have to have more of this through the political class, through our leaders in the public sector. It's simply not good enough when we go and talk to senior people in government departments. And they say, this whole digital thing, I kind of know it's important, but it's difficult, and I'm going to shrug my shoulders and pass it on to someone else lower down the organisation. It has to be top of mind for people near the top. And a lot of that, I think, is to do with interchange between the public and private sectors. We need more people in government who have seen this done for real in the outside world. It's not the same simply reading case studies and thinking you've learned about it. And the people that we have spoken to in government who've been out and worked in cutting edge businesses and come back say there's 100 things that I've seen and I would like to import, and if I can make only 5 of them stick, it would be transformational. Those are powerful stories, but we need to hear many, many more of them. Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, indeed, Chris. And I'd like to throw it open to questions. Can I ask that you identify where you're from, as well as your name, obviously?
Hi, my name's Liam Burlington. I work as a digital marketing manager, and I'm also Deputy Chair Political of Ashton Underline Conservatives. I agree with Matt's comment on standardising local government IT. I think there's a big opportunity there when I'm benchmarking against other councils for elections. It's very hard to find one set of information against another council, so I agree with you on that. One thing that I'd ask Francis is, one thing that Google are doing is giving a information dashboard to access information that Google holds on the various services that it offers. How can the government do that with its multiple departments, bring that together so that people can see the information that on themselves, just like Google, as you would do through a credit report?
I'll perhaps take a couple more. If anybody else has immediately got a question, or if not, would you like to respond to that? What's on the idea of the Google style dashboard?
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting approach. I mean, I think we've got a lot to learn from companies like Google. I mean, the thing I took from them when I visited was their mantra of fail fast, do things, test, prove, stop doing them if they don't work. And government's terrible at that. And learn from them. The criminal thing is not to try something new that doesn't work. The criminal thing is to carry on doing it when it stops, or never to try anything new in case it doesn't work, or when it doesn't work, not to learn from it. So I mean, there's a lot culturally. Our internal culture is actually the direct reverse of that. Yeah, I mean, control of data. One of the things we've done as we have been developing our identity assurance program is we've had a very good, active advisory group, including the sort of privacy and identity lobbies, Data ID, Big Brother Watch, which various others, various academic organisations. And they produced a set of identity principles which we're consulting on at the moment. That's actually just trying to get them up on my iPad that the wireless connection but I mean, it's 9 really simple principles. Things like, I can choose which identity provider I use. I can see the data. I my data and change my data whenever I choose. It is absolutely crucial, if this stuff is to work, that people have a sense of control themselves. The whole open data, openness agenda really supports that, because actually what people hate is the idea that there's stuff going on they don't know about, and they've got no control over it. So it is very important.
Anybody else want to contribute to all of that?
Yeah, I think the permissions dashboard in Google's, you can see a lot of companies starting to look at it. I think the power of that is when you start to recognise that where individuals who are given permission for a particular use case of the data actually can be utilised across a number of instances, whether it's government and business. So we can obviously identify, as a mobile company, we can identify where a customer is. Now that's pretty serious information. You wouldn't use that lightly. But as a customer, we're giving permission a lot for those sort of things. If you think people are using Nike fuel bands, or whether they're even using the telemetry on their phone to get identification of what a route would be, you're giving away the information to say, where am I, and you can, it's more than where am I, it's like where have I been, what's my exercise regime, and you can get a lot of personal information. I think the power of that, and people are becoming more comfortable, but the more powerful, the more the sort of concerns are quite rightly there, that you want to make sure that that's taken, security, that's taken seriously. But I do feel, and certainly the conversations that we have with other bodies, including government, is about how can we securely use, as we talked about ID earlier, secure ID that's digital, that if someone says to us that they're comfortable to use permission of where they are, that information actually delivers even richer services. It's not just EE that's giving you a service that says, I know you travel the same route to work every day, so when you wake up I send you a text to say, actually the route is blocked today. That's a useful service. People would give us permission to do that. Would they also give us permission to give it to government so that they can use services that are richer and richer? And I think that that's quite a complex area, but you can see the value of that to an individual. It's very strong quid pro quo if you can get the services right. We've got to get the infrastructure right, and a lot of the things that have been said earlier, it's about what's the common approach to that, make sure it's secure, and actually we can share the information easily.
So just one quick build, which is, I guess, implicit in the question is the perhaps the assumption that all of the data on me and my activities sits somewhere in government, and I should have a right to access that information. And of course, there is a whole debate about how much of that data should come down to the citizen and be stored in a mechanism that might choose, right, encrypted on my computer or in an account in the cloud or whatever it is, right? But actually under my control, I can see at a glance what I hold, and it's up to me to grant permission to the state or to business entities that I deal with, or to my solicitor or whoever it is. And that model, we're not there yet, but I think is one of these ones which, over a longer horizon, could have huge potential.
Just a very quick comment about big data, because I mentioned open wash earlier, and cloud wash and green wash. I can definitely see coming down the line big data wash as well. So, for example, the government isn't done Humby yet. Done Humby transformed Tesco's, Sainsbury's at the time, and said, this smart card thing's never going to catch on. It's pretty silly in the course of history. I think we're seeing a lot of stuff about big data. Wonderful evidence-based analytics for some of the problems. The problem is, the sad fact is, unfortunately, at the moment at the departmental level, that most of our data is still in a right old mess. And unfortunately, you've got to compare apples and apples to make sense of your data. Much of the data that's been released by government so far are flat files. No one really knows their way around one of those flat files, and it's quite difficult. There are organisations such as Monitor, for example, who have enormous executive power to be able to shut down trusts for non-performance. You have to monitor all sorts of disparate data from lots and lots and lots of trusts in a similar way, and they have problems at the moment. And it's their job to do it, and it's not so their fault. It's where government's at. I personally think we're a long way before what we mustn't do, I think, is romanticise or mythologise the idea of big data. Sounds a bit like Big Blue, doesn't it? There'll be some sort of wonderful kind of technical place in government where this data is created and good evidence comes out. I don't think of it like that. I think it's going to be much more of a struggle. I think it's going to be built bottom up. And I think the first thing we need to do is to sort out information architecture, information governance, and do a lot of the groundwork first. And we're some years away from it, I'm afraid.
Francis, you've got those principles
Yes.
up to
Thanks to E, I now am connected. And yeah, I mean, I'd recommend actually people to look at these identity assurance principles. They cover the whole thing, and it's really simple. Identity assurance activities can only take place by consent or approval. Identity assurance can only take place in ways I understand and when I am fully informed. I can use and choose as many different identifiers or identity providers as I want to. And my request or transaction only uses the minimum data that's necessary to meet my needs. I choose when to update my records. I have to be provided with copies of all my data on request. I can move or remove my data whenever I want. So it's kind of, it's very kind of plain language, straightforward stuff, which has got a high level of built. I mean, our way of dealing with this has been very, very open to show all our workings to the various groups who are interested in this and who are very suspicious, and rightly very suspicious, because actually this hasn't been good in the past. And actually we've got another area we're looking at the moment all around the issues of data sharing, where we have a kind of ramshackle, sort of ad hoc piecemeal set of restraints and permissions to share data sets even within government. And the last government tried to open all of that up in a way that was unprepared and far too broad, and kind of slipped into a completely random bill on coroners or something. It was called sort of section 152, and was suddenly something on data sharing. Not surprisingly, it crashed. But we're having a really good look at this to see if there's a way of doing this that enables us to share data sets in a way that's safe and protects the citizen, but enables, for example, us to put together data sets, data on education and tax, which actually could potentially throw some real light on social mobility. I mean, you can't do that without bringing together data that's very readily available. So we need to do these things. This, I mean, I know Mark's done a lot of work on this in the past, but we need to. There's a lot of potential, but it's fraught with risk. I mean, the advantage we have is technology now exists, so that if you want to share data sets, you do not have to aggregate them. And there was a time when to share them you had to create an aggregated big data set, which gets people going, understandably, about big brother databases. But we can now do it instantaneously for the purposes of matching and mining and analyzing data in a way that doesn't create big aggregate databases.
Another question. Oh, yes. Gentleman there.
Chexburn, I'm from Chichester. Francis made mention of something which government were going to deliver online, and I think, Francis, you followed that up by saying, and only online, and then someone on the panel picked up the question of what about the 10 million people who are not online for whatever reason. And yet, yesterday I think I saw a report that said 95% of the population of the country have a mobile phone. I came to local government, county council, and from the army, and found it was necessary to drag the county council, you mentioned local government, into the 21st century, and I very much piloted much of it. But I was forever running up against that brick wall about what about the people who are not able to manage the online information? Do we really believe that they are a dying breed, literally, and that there'll come the day when everybody is able to manage the online?
Okay.
Or is there a fact that there are people and families who don't have IT technology in the house, who are afraid of it, who are afraid to shop online, who are afraid of identity theft?
Good.
Shall I quickly
Yes.
deal with that, because it takes us in, it's a really good question. I mean, I think it's the case now 82% of the population are online. It's rising, it's bound to be rising, and will continue to do so. When we say services should be available only online, we recognise that there will continue to be, and there will ultimately be, an irreducible minimum of people who either can't or won't do things online, and you still must have access to services. And our approach is to, which was very much a Martha Lane Fox approach, but it's completely right, is to say that we should provide an assisted digital option. So it's still done digitally and online, but with assistance, and that can be done in lots of interesting ways. It could be done by libraries, for example, and we're looking at contracts for assisted digital providers across the piece, looking at different transactions. It could be libraries, it could be post offices. Ideally, we want to construct these contracts in such a way that the provider is incentivized to use the assistance to get that person online. So you're actually, at the same time as enabling them to do the transaction they need to do, you're also using it to promote digital inclusion. So you're reducing that number of people who aren't online ever more. But you're also absolutely right, and Jerry was completely right also, to talk about you know, the advent of the smartphone. Sometimes, I mean, we're making sure that all of our digital applications are also mobile applications, so that people can increasingly transact in a mobile way. And I find actually when I talk around in different parts of the world to other governments about these issues driving efficiency, and countries, there are various countries, they say, can you help us to create a proper bureaucracy? And my response generally is to say, why don't you just skip all of that? Because actually, if you're recently in Burma, talking to the reformers there, and they're both in government and out of government, and you know, Burma is potentially got massive potential economically. They got loads of spectrum. They can make that available. You can see a huge explosion of mobile use in Burma very, very quickly. And actually, the smart thing for them to do is, instead of creating a bureaucracy, is to disintermediate the bureaucracy. Because one of the things that digital does, and this is a huge attraction in the developing world, is that it cuts out petty corruption. Because actually, if you can do your business with the government entirely digitally, and you cut out the face-to-face backhanders and jump the queue with greasing someone's palm, it's a huge benefit from that point of view. So this is the way of the future.
Does anybody else want to quickly chip in, or shall we move to some more questions? We've literally got about 5 minutes left, so yes.
Geoffrey Dearwood, I'm leader of the Conservatives in Brighton and Hove, and which is very much a strong digital economy, very, very strong indeed. And actually, Brighton and Hove, just an answer to one of the other points, do work with the other 6 major authorities in the South East. We are actually the lead authority, believe it or not, on IT and technology, because at this moment in time, we're going through chaos, trying to embrace this latest security thing. I could stand here for an hour and talk to you about it. But I just wondered, can I ask this to Dr. Thompson, are we actually training enough people? I mean, could you lend us a few Doctor of Philosophy graduates to help both central government and local government? Are we training? Sometimes I think we haven't got the people who are able to.
Yeah, I think it's a massive, again, training is an enormous problem, but also I think that there are some irreducibly technical parts to this, but actually a lot of this is about architecture. It's about people who understand emerging business models within government. We're starting to hear a lot of jargon around target operating models. we need more thinking about exactly what it is. For example, the local government platforms mean. Does that just mean an IT system, one huge IT system across local government? Absolutely not. What it means is standardising business processes with underlying common technology standards, so that you don't care what technology runs on, you don't care who your supplier is. You just assemble these standard business processes, and thereby I can very much see in 5 to 10 years' time taking 30, 40, 50, 60% of public sector bureaucracies away. And that means partly by saving money on digital transactions, self-service, but also just think about what that releases for face-to-face services. So forget the digital transactions, the nursing, the home care visits, the social care. And I'd love to see 2 or 3 times more money in funding going to that. So we could actually see, I think, ironically and very paradoxically, the kind of radicalness of digital could actually generate more face-to-face services for people rather than less in the long run.
I'm going to say very quickly, I'm running grant chats. I've nearly got 1,000 people on my email base to contact my electors. I'm all in favour of this, but I can't say I understand it.
Who else would like to ask? I think that probably needs to be the final question, actually, because we're unfortunately running very short of time. I think you had your hand up first.
Hi, my question's for Francis. Thank you very much for talking about the benefits of IT for government. I was wondering if you could talk at all about any benefits you might see of it being brought onto a campaign environment and with the party and stuff.
Could you say who you are?
I'm Oscar Bickett. I work for a online marketing firm in London.
I can't say a lot about it because it's not an area that I do have done a lot on. I mean, but it is huge and underexploited. Grant is really good on this. I mean, he really kind of lays a trail as an MP in terms of building an email base and all of that, and he understands it. He's very good at it, and so he's the person to ask. I kind of did some stuff in this territory when I was party chairman way back, but things have moved on a long way since then. I don't think anyone's really kind of mastered the art of digital fundraising in the UK in the way that the American candidates and campaigns have. I don't know why that is, but it's a massive potential.
Movement.org or
Yeah.
Chris, did you have something you wanted to say?
All I was going to add was, there was this guy called Obama in the US, and check him out.
Yeah.
Sorry to say, I think we're going to have to leave it there. We're on 6 o'clock now. So I'd just like to thank the panel for what I think has been an incredibly stimulating discussion, and all of you for your questions. And can I ask you to leave as quietly as possible, because there's an event with Chris Grayling next door, so to avoid disturbing that, if you could try to leave quietly, that would be much appreciated.